My parents left the entire inheritance to my brother, saying that because I was adopted, I didn't deserve anything in the family. They gave me money for an ice cream to humiliate me, but little did they know that money would change my life. I need to tell you something that happened to me 3 years ago, something that changed everything. My name is Tiffany, and I was 25 when my world collapsed in the most humiliating way possible. I had always known I was adopted. Charles and Carol took me in when I was just 6 months old, and for most of my life, I believed I was part of their family. Sure, there were subtle differences in how they treated me compared to Daniel, their biological son who came along when I was 7, but I convinced myself it was just my imagination. That Tuesday afternoon in March, I was sitting in their living room in Millfield, our small town in Ohio. The house on Maple Street had always felt like home to me. A modest 2-story colonial with white shutters and a front porch where Carol grew her prized roses. I had come over because Charles said they needed to discuss something important with me and Daniel. "Tiffany, Daniel, come sit down," Charles said, his voice unusually formal. He was wearing his good navy suit, the one he reserved for church and important occasions. Carol sat beside him on the floral couch, her hands folded neatly in her lap, avoiding eye contact with me. Daniel slouched in the armchair across from me, scrolling through his phone with that smirk he always wore when he thought something amusing was about to happen. At 18, he had that cocky confidence that came from never being told no, never having to work for anything. "We've been thinking about our future, about what happens when we're gone," Charles began, clearing his throat. "We've made some decisions about the inheritance, about who gets what." My stomach tightened. Something in his tone felt wrong. "Daniel, as our biological son, will inherit the house, the business, and all our savings," Carol said quietly, still not looking at me. "We feel it's important to keep everything in the bloodline." The words hit me like a physical blow. 25 years of believing I belonged somewhere, and it all crumbled in that moment. But they weren't done. "Now, Tiffany," Charles continued, reaching into his pocket, "we don't want you to think we've forgotten about you." He pulled out a handful of coins, quarters, dimes, nickels, maybe $3 total. "Here's a little something for you. Why don't you go buy yourself an ice cream?" The silence in that room was deafening. Daniel snorted, actually laughed out loud. "Ice cream money? Really, Dad?" I stared at the coins in Charles's outstretched palm, my vision blurring. 25 years old, and they were giving me pocket change like I was a child they were dismissing. The humiliation burned through my chest, making it hard to breathe. "Take it, Tiffany," Carol said softly, finally meeting my eyes. There was something that might have been guilt there, but not enough to stop her. My hand trembled as I reached out and took the coins. They felt cold and insignificant in my palm, the weight of my entire worth according to the only family I'd ever known. Daniel was still laughing. "Ice cream money," he repeated, shaking his head. "That's hilarious." I stood up slowly, my legs unsteady. "Thank you," I managed to whisper, though the words tasted like poison. "You understand, don't you, dear?" Carol asked. "Blood is thicker than water." I nodded because I couldn't trust my voice anymore. I walked to the front door on autopilot, my hand clutching those coins so tightly they left marks on my palm. Behind me, I could hear Daniel saying something about having friends over to celebrate, and Charles discussing business expansion plans. The door closed behind me with a soft click, and I stood on that familiar front porch where I'd spent countless summer evenings, holding $3 in change and feeling like my entire life had been a lie. That's when everything started. I walked down Maple Street in a daze, those coins burning in my pocket like they were on fire. 25 years of birthdays, Christmases, graduations, and this was what I was worth to them. $3 in loose change. My small apartment was only 6 blocks away, but I couldn't bring myself to go home yet. Home. That word felt meaningless now. I had been living in that tiny studio above Peterson's Bakery for 2 years, working as a receptionist at the local dental office, barely making ends meet while Daniel lived rent-free in their basement, playing video games and finding himself. I found myself standing in front of Murphy's Corner Store, the little convenience shop that had been there since I was a kid. Mrs. Murphy always kept the lottery machine right by the front door, its bright lights flashing play to win in rotating colors. I'd walked past it thousands of times and never given it a second thought. But today was different. Today I was holding the money they'd given me to buy ice cream, and something inside me snapped. I pulled out those coins and counted them. $2.75. Not even enough for a decent ice cream cone these days. The lottery tickets were $2 each for the big jackpot drawing that Friday. "You buying something, hun?" Mrs. Murphy asked from behind the counter. She was a kind woman in her 60s who always remembered my name and asked about my job. "Yeah," I heard myself say. I want a lottery ticket. She looked surprised. In all the years she'd known me, I'd never bought so much as a scratch-off. Just one? I stared at the machine, at those flashing lights promising dreams I'd never dared to have. How much for 5 tickets? That'd be $10? Dear. I pulled out my debit card with shaking hands. $10 was almost all I had until my next paycheck, money I needed for groceries. But something inside me was screaming that I had to do this. Had to turn their humiliation into something else. Anything else. Actually, make it 10 tickets, I said, my voice getting stronger. $20 worth. Mrs. Murphy raised an eyebrow but didn't question it. She printed out 10 tickets from the machine, each one showing different number combinations for Friday's drawing. The jackpot was up to $47 million. More money than existed in my world. You feeling lucky today? She asked, handing me the tickets. I thought about Charles's condescending smile, Carol's guilty eyes, Daniel's laughter. No, I said honestly. I'm feeling angry. She chuckled. Sometimes that works just as well. I walked home clutching those tickets, my grocery money gone, my pride shattered, but something new burning in my chest. It wasn't hope. I wasn't naive enough to think I'd actually win. It was rebellion. Those tickets represented everything they thought I could never have, never be, never achieve. Back in my cramped studio, I taped the tickets to my bathroom mirror where I'd see them every morning. 10 little pieces of paper that cost me my food budget for the week, bought with the anger I felt at being dismissed like a child. I called in sick to work the next day. I couldn't face Dr. Patterson's cheerful questions about my family, couldn't pretend everything was normal when my entire foundation had crumbled. Instead, I lay in bed replaying that scene over and over, wondering how I'd been so blind to what I really meant to them. The drawing was Friday night at 11 p.m. I wasn't going to watch, I had no illusions about winning. But I kept those tickets taped to my mirror, a reminder of the moment I stopped accepting the role they'd assigned me. $20 in lottery tickets bought with rage and heartbreak. The most reckless thing I'd ever done in my careful, quiet life. I had no idea it would change everything. I didn't watch the drawing Friday night. I was lying in bed eating ramen noodles, my dinner for the 3rd night running because of my impulsive lottery purchase, when my phone started buzzing with news alerts. I ignored them. I always ignored lottery results because they were never relevant to my life. Saturday morning, I peeled myself out of bed and stumbled to the bathroom. Those 10 tickets stared back at me from the mirror. And for the first time since Tuesday, I felt embarrassed about my reckless spending. $20 I couldn't afford, wasted on a fantasy. I was brushing my teeth when I decided to just get it over with. I pulled out my phone and searched for the winning numbers from Friday's drawing. The website loaded slowly on my ancient phone, and I read the numbers aloud. 7, 14, 23, 31, 45, and Powerball 12. I grabbed the first ticket from the mirror. Different numbers entirely. The second ticket, not even close. Third ticket, fourth, fifth, all losers, just like I'd expected. The sixth ticket made me freeze. I read the numbers 3 times before my brain processed what I was seeing. 7, 14, 23, 31, 45, and Powerball 12. Every single number matched. My hands started shaking so violently I dropped the ticket. It fluttered to the bathroom floor and I stared down at it like it might explode. This couldn't be real. People like me didn't win the lottery. People like me got ice cream money and lived in studio apartments above bakeries. I picked up the ticket with trembling fingers and checked the numbers against my phone screen again. Still matched. All of them. $47 million. I sat down hard on my tiny bathroom floor and started laughing. Not happy laughter. The kind of hysterical laughter that comes when your brain can't process reality anymore. I laughed until tears streamed down my face, until my sides hurt, until the absurdity of it all threatened to break me completely. The ice cream money, the humiliation that had driven me to buy these tickets in pure spite. And now this. I called the lottery office that Monday morning, my voice barely above a whisper as I explained I needed to claim a prize. They scheduled an appointment for Wednesday at their regional office in Columbus, an hour drive from Millfield. "Congratulations, ma'am," the woman on the phone said cheerfully. "How much are we talking about?" $47 million, I whispered. The silence on the other end lasted so long I thought the call had dropped. "Ma'am, did you say 47 million? "Yes. We'll need to verify everything, but if that's accurate, you'll want to speak with our winter services team. Have you told anyone about this yet?" "No one," I said. And I meant it. I hadn't called Charles and Carol to rub their faces in it. I hadn't told my coworkers or Mrs. Murphy or anyone. Something instinctual told me to keep this secret, to guard it like the precious thing it was. Wednesday morning, I drove to Columbus in my 15-year-old Honda Civic, wearing my best dress, a navy blue one I'd bought for job interviews 3 years ago. The lottery office was in a nondescript building downtown, and I sat in the waiting room surrounded by framed photos of previous winners holding those giant checks. When they verified my ticket and confirmed the numbers, the reality finally hit me. After taxes, I'd receive about $28 million. $28 million. More money than I could have imagined in a dozen lifetimes. What would you like to do about publicity? The winner services coordinator asked. Most winners do a press conference, photos with the check. No publicity, I said immediately. I want to stay anonymous. She looked surprised. Are you sure? Most people want to celebrate. I thought about Charles and Carol and Daniel, about the humiliation, the ice cream money, the years of subtle signs that I was never truly family. I'm sure. Complete anonymity. They processed everything that day, set up the bank accounts, arranged the payments, handled the legal paperwork. By Thursday afternoon, I was officially a multimillionaire. I drove back to Millfield in the same beat-up Honda, to the same studio apartment, to the same job. Nothing looked different, but everything had changed. The ice cream money had become my freedom. The first thing I did was absolutely nothing. For 2 weeks, I went to work at the dental office, came home to my studio apartment, and acted like my entire world hadn't shifted on its axis. The money sat in accounts I could barely believe were mine, earning more in interest each day than I used to make in a month. But I was planning. Every night, I spread papers across my small kitchen table and researched investments, business opportunities, real estate markets. I bought books about wealth management and read them by lamplight until my eyes burned. I had no intention of being a lottery winner who lost it all within 5 years. This money was going to build something lasting. More importantly, I watched Charles, Carol, and Daniel from a distance. Social media made it easy. Carol posted constantly about Daniel's entrepreneurial ventures and Charles's work at the insurance agency. I created fake accounts to follow them, keeping tabs on their lives while I planned mine. After a month, I made my first move. I quit my job at the dental office, telling Dr. Patterson I'd received a small inheritance from a distant relative and wanted to pursue business opportunities in Columbus. He was sad to see me go. I'd been reliable, if unremarkable. I moved to Columbus quietly, renting a modest apartment downtown while I searched for the right property to buy. Not a mansion or anything flashy that would draw attention. I found a beautiful historic house in German Village. 4 bedrooms, completely renovated, perfect for the successful businesswoman I was about to become. Then I started my company, Mitchell Consulting Solutions. Yes, I kept their last name, though they'd never know why. I specialized in helping small businesses optimize their operations and finances, drawing on skills I'd developed managing tight budgets my entire life. I hired a small team, rented office space, and threw myself into building something real. The beautiful irony was that everything I'd learned from being overlooked and underestimated made me exceptional at business. I understood what it felt like to be dismissed, so I listened to clients others ignored. I knew how to stretch every dollar because I'd lived paycheck to paycheck for years. I could spot inefficiencies because I'd survived on scraps. Within 6 months, Mitchell Consulting was thriving. I had 12 employees and more clients than we could handle. I used the lottery money strategically, investing in the business, buying commercial real estate, building a portfolio that would sustain itself long after the initial windfall was spent. But I never forgot about Millfield. Every few weeks, I'd drive the hour back to my hometown, staying in the Holiday Inn Express just outside town. I'd eat at Murphy's Diner, shop at the grocery store, keep my finger on the pulse of local gossip. Mrs. Murphy still remembered me and always asked how I was doing in the big city. Through her, I learned that Charles's insurance agency was struggling. Some new competition had moved into town, offering better rates and more personal service. Carol had developed diabetes and needed expensive medications. Daniel had dropped out of community college, again, and was still living in their basement, occasionally helping with yard work for neighbors. I also learned about the house, that beautiful colonial on Maple Street, the one Carol had spent 20 years perfecting, with her prize-winning rose garden and the front porch where I'd spent countless summer evenings. Charles had mentioned to Murphy that they might need to downsize soon, maybe sell and move to something smaller. That's when I knew exactly what I was going to do. I started researching the Millfield real estate market, learning everything about property values, recent sales, market trends. I studied that house specifically, when it was built, its assessed value, comparable properties in the neighborhood. I memorized every detail about the place I'd once called home. Then I waited. I was patient, methodical, watching from my perch in Columbus as their situation slowly deteriorated. I had the luxury of time now, and resources they couldn't imagine. I could afford to be strategic about this in ways they'd never expect from the girl they'd given ice cream money. The girl they'd underestimated so completely was about to buy their world. 8 months after I'd walked out of their house clutching ice cream money, the cracks in their perfect life started showing. I heard about it first through Mrs. Murphy, who mentioned during one of my visits that Charles seemed stressed lately, and then through casual social media stalking that revealed more than they probably intended to share. Charles lost his biggest client in November, Millfield Manufacturing, a local company that had been with his insurance agency for 15 years. They switched to a newer firm that offered comprehensive packages Charles couldn't match. His posts on Facebook, usually confident and business-focused, became increasingly defensive, full of complaints about unfair competition and clients who don't value loyalty. Carol's diabetes worsened in December. Her cheerful updates about holiday baking were replaced by stressed posts about medical bills and specialist appointments. I learned from Murphy that she'd had to cut back her hours at the library where she worked part-time because the fatigue was becoming unmanageable. Daniel, predictably, was no help at all. His social media was a constant stream of complaints about boring small-town life and photos of him drinking with friends while his parents struggled. He'd managed to wreck his car in January, drunk driving, though the charges were quietly dropped thanks to Charles's connections, and now relied on them for transportation everywhere. The house that had once been their pride became a burden. Carol's posts showed less and less of their interior, and when she did share photos, I could see the small signs of neglect. Paint peeling around window frames, the front porch railing looking loose, the prize-winning rose garden looking sparse and poorly maintained. I drove through their neighborhood one cold February evening and saw Charles outside, struggling to fix a broken shutter by himself. The man who used to hire contractors for everything was now trying to do his own repairs. A for-sale sign stood in the Hendersons' yard next door. Their neighbors had moved to Florida, Charles had confided to Murphy, because they could no longer afford Millfield's rising property taxes. By March, exactly 1 year after the ice cream money incident, I knew they were in serious financial trouble. Murphy mentioned that Carol had asked if the store was hiring. She needed additional income and was willing to work evenings. Charles had started driving an older sedan instead of his usual luxury SUV, and Daniel was seen asking neighbors if they needed odd jobs done. The irony wasn't lost on me. The son they'd chosen to inherit everything was proving completely useless while they struggled. The daughter they'd dismissed with pocket change was building a multi-million-dollar empire an hour away. But I wasn't ready to act yet. I needed them desperate enough to accept any reasonable offer, distressed enough that they wouldn't ask too many questions about a quick cash sale. I needed the situation to become truly dire. That's when fate intervened in the form of Charles's heart attack. It wasn't serious. Murphy called it just a warning. But the hospital bills and the time away from work devastated their already precarious finances. Carol's Facebook posts became increasingly frantic, asking friends for prayers and positive thoughts during this difficult time. Daniel's response to his father's health scare was to post photos from a bar, celebrating his 21st birthday while Charles was still in the hospital. By April, I knew they were going to lose the house. Murphy mentioned that Charles had stopped coming in for his usual morning coffee, trying to cut expenses everywhere, she said sadly. The rose garden Carol had tended for 2 decades was completely neglected, and neighbors were starting to whisper about the property bringing down the neighborhood's value. That's when I made the call to my attorney in Columbus. I need you to start monitoring a property in Millfield, I told him. When it goes on the market, I want to know immediately. What's the address? He asked. I gave him the address on Maple Street, the house where I'd learned my true worth to the people who raised me. Are you looking to buy it? Eventually, I said, looking out my office window at the skyline of Columbus, at the empire I'd built from their cruelty. But not until they're truly desperate. The call came on a Thursday morning in May. My attorney, David Harrison, phoned while I was reviewing quarterly reports in my Columbus office. The Millfield property just hit the market, he said without preamble. Listed yesterday at $215,000. I felt my pulse quicken. After months of watching and waiting, it was finally happening. What's the listing agent saying about their situation? Motivated sellers need to close quickly due to medical expenses. The agent mentioned they're hoping for a fast cash sale. $215,000. I knew from my research that they'd paid $160,000 for that house 18 years ago. And with the improvements Carol had made over the years, it should have been worth at least $250,000 in the current market. They were already pricing it below value, which meant they were truly desperate. I want you to monitor it for 2 weeks, I told David. Let me know if there are any showings, any interest, any price changes. And if there's no activity, then we make our move. Those 2 weeks crawled by. I had David drive by the property every few days, reporting back on what he observed. The house looked tired, he said. The lawn needed work, the shutters could use paint, and there was a general air of neglect that hadn't been there before. Mrs. Murphy confirmed what I suspected during my next visit to Millfield. They're just heartbroken about having to sell, she told me, wiping down the counter at her store. That house has been their whole life. Carol put so much work into that garden, and now she can barely maintain it with all her health problems. Anyone looking at it? I asked casually. A few people, but nothing serious. The market's been slow lately, and people are scared off by all the work it needs. Plus, Charles keeps telling people it's the perfect family home, which makes it sound like they won't negotiate much. Perfect. They were overplaying their hand, refusing to acknowledge how desperate they really were. After 2 weeks with no serious interest, I gave David the green light. Make an offer, I told him. $140,000 cash, close in 10 days. He was quiet for a moment. Tiffany, that's quite low. Are you sure? They listed it at $215 and haven't had a single offer in 2 weeks. They owe money to hospitals, credit card companies, and probably the bank. They can't afford to wait for a better offer. But still, that's $75,000 below asking price. I thought about Charles counting out those coins in his palm, the way he'd smiled when he told me to buy ice cream. Make the offer exactly as I said. Cash, 10-day close, no contingencies. David called back 3 hours later. They're upset, he said diplomatically. The listing agent said Charles called the offer insulting and completely unreasonable. They've declined. I had expected this. Pride was expensive, and Charles had always had too much of it. That's fine. Tell them the offer stands for 48 hours, then we're withdrawing it and looking at other properties. Other properties? No, of course not, but they don't need to know that. The psychology was simple. Right now, $140,000 felt like an insult. But when it was the only offer they'd received, when the bills kept coming and the house kept sitting empty on the market, it would start to look like salvation. I went about my business for the next 2 days, running meetings, reviewing client proposals, expanding my company into new markets. But part of my attention was always on my phone, waiting for David's call. It came at 4:30 p.m. on Friday, exactly 47 hours after we'd made the offer. They want to counter, David said. $170,000. No counter, I replied immediately. The offer was $140, cash, 10-day close. It expires in 1 hour. Tiffany, David, trust me. They can't afford to play negotiation games. They need this sale more than we need this house. At 5:15, my phone rang again. They've accepted, David said, and I could hear the surprise in his voice. $140,000 cash, 10-day close. They want to know when we can sign papers. I closed my eyes and felt something like victory wash over me. Not celebration. This wasn't about joy. This was about justice. About a 25-year-old woman with ice cream money finally having the power to set the terms. Schedule the closing for next Friday, I told him. And David? I want to be there personally to hand them the check. The week between contract signing and closing was torture for all of us, though they didn't know I was suffering too. David reported that Charles had called the attorney's office twice, asking about the buyer and whether the sale was really going to go through. Carol had been spotted at Murphy's store, tearfully telling Mrs. Murphy about having to pack up 20 years of memories. She asked if I knew anything about the buyer. Murphy told me during one of my casual visits to town. Some anonymous cash buyer from Columbus. She's worried they're going to tear the house down or turn it into rental units. If only she knew. Daniel, predictably, was treating the whole situation like a joke. His social media was full of complaints about having to help pack boxes and move furniture. Finally escaping this boring house, he posted, apparently oblivious to his parents' heartbreak. The closing was scheduled for 10 a.m. on Friday at the title company's office on Main Street. I arrived 15 minutes early, wearing a conservative black suit and carrying a briefcase that contained the cashier's check for $140,000. The money that would erase their debt and destroy their illusions all at once. Charles and Carol walked in at exactly 10, looking older than their 58 years. Carol's hair was grayer than I remembered, and Charles had developed a slight stoop since his heart attack. They were dressed in their best clothes, the same outfits they'd worn to my high school graduation 7 years earlier. They didn't recognize me at first. I'd changed my hair, lost weight from stress and long work hours, and adopted the confident posture that came with financial security. I was no longer the timid young woman they'd dismissed with pocket change. "Mr. and Mrs. Mitchell," the title company representative said, "I'd like you to meet the buyer, Tiffany Williams." I'd had David use a pseudonym to protect my privacy, though the irony of choosing Williams, Carol's maiden name, wasn't lost on me. Charles shook my hand with the firm grip he'd always used to intimidate people. "Ms. Williams, thank you for making this process so quick. We appreciate the cash offer, even though—" He trailed off, clearly thinking better of voicing his opinion about the low price. "I understand you've lived in the house for a long time," I said, keeping my voice professionally neutral. "It must be difficult to leave." Carol's eyes filled with tears. 18 years, she said softly. "We raised our children there. I planted every rose in that garden myself. Children, plural. As if I had ever truly counted as one of their children. The paperwork took 45 minutes. Documents were signed, funds were transferred, keys were exchanged. Charles and Carol answered questions about utilities, property taxes, and neighborhood covenants with the weary resignation of people who had no choice but to comply. When it was finished, I handed Charles the cashier's check. $140,000, enough to pay off their debts and give them a modest nest egg, but far less than the house was worth and a fraction of what they'd invested in it over the years. "Thank you," Charles said stiffly, staring at the check. "I hope you'll take good care of the place." "I have very specific plans for it," I replied truthfully. As we prepared to leave, Carol turned to me with a hesitant smile. "Would you mind if we drove by one more time? Just to say goodbye properly?" "Of course," I said. "It's your house until Monday when you finish moving out." But I had other plans for Monday, plans they were about to discover. We walked out of the title company together, Charles and Carol heading toward their aging sedan, me toward my leased BMW. They would drive to Maple Street for one last look at their former home. I would follow them there for something else entirely. After 14 months of patience and planning, it was time for the real revelation to begin. The house was officially mine now, but more importantly, they were about to learn exactly who had bought it from them. I gave them a 5-minute head start before driving to Maple Street. When I arrived, their sedan was parked in the driveway, and through the front windows I could see them walking slowly through the empty rooms, their voices carrying through the glass as they said goodbye to 18 years of memories. I parked across the street and waited. This wasn't the moment yet. Monday would be better, when they came back to collect the last of their belongings, when reality had fully settled in about what they'd lost. But I couldn't resist sitting there for a few minutes, looking at the house that had shaped so much of my childhood. The white shutters needed paint, and Carol's prize-winning rose garden was overgrown and neglected. But it was still the place where I'd learned to ride a bike, where I'd done homework at the kitchen table, where I'd believed I belonged to a family that loved me. My phone buzzed with a text from David. "Congratulations on your new property. What's the timeline for your renovation plans?" Renovation. That was one way to put it. Charles and Carol emerged from the house 20 minutes later. Carol was crying openly now, and Charles had his arm around her shoulders as they walked to their car. They sat in the driveway for several more minutes, just staring at the house, before finally driving away. That weekend, I made final arrangements with Demolition Solutions, a company I'd researched extensively. Full teardown scheduled for Tuesday morning. I wanted the house gone quickly, cleanly, and completely. Monday morning, I dressed carefully for the encounter I'd been planning for over a year. A tailored gray suit, professional but not flashy. I wanted to look successful but not ostentatious. I wanted them to see me as I truly was, the woman their cruelty had forged. I arrived at the house at 9 a.m. and parked in the driveway, right where Charles always used to park his SUV. Through the living room window, I could see boxes and furniture they'd left behind, things they couldn't fit in their new apartment, I assumed. At 9:30, their sedan pulled up behind my BMW. I watched in the rearview mirror as Charles and Carol got out, looking confused about the unfamiliar car in their former driveway. Daniel was with them, probably pressed into service for moving boxes. He looked exactly the same as he had 14 months ago. Lazy, entitled, completely oblivious to anyone's struggles but his own. I took a deep breath, opened my car door, and stepped out. "Excuse me," Charles called out, walking toward me with the authoritative stride he used when he thought someone was trespassing. "This is private property. You can't park here." "Actually," I said, turning to face them fully for the first time, "I can." The recognition hit Carol first. Her face went completely white, and she grabbed Charles's arm. "Charles," she whispered, but he was still focused on what he perceived as a parking problem. "Charles," Carol whispered again, more urgently this time. "Look at her. Really look." Charles stopped mid-stride, his eyes narrowing as he studied my face. I watched the exact moment recognition dawned, his expression shifting from confusion to disbelief to something approaching horror. "Tiffany?" he said, his voice barely audible. "Hello, Charles, Carol, Daniel." I kept my voice steady, professional. "I hope you don't mind me being here. After all, it is my house now." Daniel, who had been slouching against their car scrolling through his phone, looked up sharply. "What do you mean, your house?" "I mean, I bought it," I said simply. "I'm Tiffany Williams, the cash buyer from Columbus, though you probably remember me better as Tiffany Mitchell, the girl you gave ice cream money to 14 months ago." The silence that followed was deafening. Charles's face cycled through several shades of red and pale, while Carol looked like she might faint. Daniel just stared, his mouth hanging open like a fish. "That's impossible," Charles finally managed. "You're a receptionist. You live in that tiny apartment above the bakery. You can't afford—" He gestured helplessly at the house, at my car, at the obvious reality standing in front of him. "I was a receptionist," I corrected. "Now I own a consulting company in Columbus, Mitchell Consulting Solutions. We specialize in helping businesses optimize their operations. I have 12 employees and more clients than we can handle." "But how?" Carol's voice was barely a whisper. "You had nothing when you left here. We gave you—" She stopped, perhaps realizing how those words would sound. "Ice cream money," I finished for her. $2.75 to be exact. "You gave me pocket change and told me to go buy ice cream because I wasn't family, because blood is thicker than water. Remember?" Daniel snorted, though it sounded forced. "Come on, there's no way you got rich from $3. What did you do, rob a bank?" I reached into my purse and pulled out a lottery ticket. Not one of the winning ones, but one I'd bought recently and kept for exactly this moment. "I bought lottery tickets with your ice cream money. 10 of them, actually. I used the humiliation you gave me as motivation, and one of those tickets was worth $47 million. The words hit them like physical blows. Charles actually staggered backward, and Carol made a small sound like she'd been punched in the stomach. "You're lying," Daniel said, but his voice cracked on the words. "Am I? David Harrison, my attorney, has all the documentation if you'd like to verify it. The winning ticket was purchased at Murphy's Corner store on March 15th of last year, the day after you gave me ice cream money, the same day I decided I was done accepting the role you'd assigned me." I walked toward the front door, pulling out the keys I'd received at closing. The beautiful irony is that everything you taught me about being overlooked and underestimated made me exceptional at business. I understand what it feels like to be dismissed, so I listen to clients others ignore. I know how to stretch every dollar because I lived paycheck to paycheck for years, while Daniel lived rent-free in your basement. Charles found his voice. "Tiffany, wait. We made mistakes. We know that now. But we raised you. We gave you a home. You gave me a place to live," I interrupted, unlocking the front door. "But you never gave me a home. A home is where you belong, where you're valued, where you're considered family. This was never that for me, was it?" I stepped inside, and after a moment's hesitation, they followed me into the empty living room where this had all started 14 months ago. "The demolition crew arrives tomorrow morning at 8, I said conversationally, running my hand along the mantel where Carol used to display family photos. Photos that had always featured the three of them prominently while I appeared in the background, if at all. "They'll have everything torn down by Wednesday." "You're going to demolish it?" Carol's voice broke completely. "But why? It's a beautiful house. The garden, the memories." "Because I don't want to live here," I said simply. "I'm building something new, a 4-story commercial building that will house my company's regional office. It'll have my name on it, Mitchell Consulting Solutions, right here on Maple Street where everyone can see it." I turned to face them fully. "Every day when you drive past this corner, you'll see my success. You'll remember the girl you dismissed with ice cream money, and you'll know that she built an empire where your house used to stand." The devastation on their faces was complete. Carol sank down onto one of the boxes they'd left behind, her hands covering her mouth as she sobbed. Charles stood frozen in the middle of the empty room, staring at me like I was a ghost that had materialized to haunt him. Daniel was the first to recover, and predictably, he chose anger. "You vindictive bitch," he snarled, stepping toward me. "You bought our house just to tear it down? That's sick." "Careful, Daniel," I said calmly. "You're on my property now, and I have excellent security cameras. I'd hate for your assault charge to stick this time, especially since Daddy's connections can't help you anymore." His face went white. The drunk driving incident he thought had been quietly buried wasn't as secret as he'd believed. You planned this, Charles said slowly, his voice hollow. All of it. You've been watching us, waiting for us to fail. I've been building a life, I corrected. A successful business, financial security, a future. The fact that it coincided with your downfall is just poetic justice. We made mistakes, Carol whispered through her tears. We know we hurt you, but to destroy our home, to tear down everything we built. Everything you built. I felt the anger I'd been suppressing for 14 months finally surface. You built nothing, Carol. You inherited money from your parents to buy this house. Charles sold insurance policies to people who trusted him. Daniel has never worked a day in his life. None of you built anything. I walked to the window and looked out at the neglected rose garden. You want to know what building something actually looks like? I started with $2.75 in ice cream money and your complete dismissal of my worth. From that, I created a multi-million-dollar company that employs 12 people and helps dozens of small businesses succeed. That's building something. The lottery money, Charles protested weakly. You got lucky. The lottery ticket was bought with rage, Charles. Rage at being treated like I was worthless. And even after I won, I could have blown it all. Could have ended up broke and forgotten like most lottery winners. Instead, I invested intelligently, worked 18-hour days, and built something sustainable. The money was luck. Everything else was me. I turned back to face them. You want to know the really funny part? If you just treated me like family, if you'd included me in your inheritance plans even partially, I would have used any lottery winnings to help all of us. I would have paid off your debts, helped with Carol's medical bills, maybe even bought Daniel his own house so he could finally move out of your basement. The silence that followed was broken only by Carol's quiet crying. But you chose to make it clear that I wasn't really family, that I was just some charity case you'd taken in, worthy of pocket change and condescension. So I chose to build my own family, my employees, my clients, people who value what I bring to their lives. Tiffany, Charles tried again, his voice desperate now. We're sorry. We know we were wrong. But please don't do this. Don't tear down the house. We can work something out. We can... Work what out, Charles? Are you going to suddenly declare me your real daughter? Are you going to split Daniel's inheritance with me? Are you going to apologize for 25 years of subtle reminders that I wasn't really one of you? He had no answer because we both knew the truth. Even now, even facing the complete destruction of everything they valued, they couldn't truly see me as equal to Daniel. The demolition starts tomorrow, I said with finality. You have until 7 p.m. today to remove anything else you want to keep. After that, everything becomes debris. I walked toward the front door, then paused. Oh, and Charles? You might want to look into that new insurance agency that's been taking your clients, Mitchell Insurance Services. I funded their startup as part of my investment portfolio. Turns out there was plenty of room in this market for honest, competent insurance professionals. His face went ashen. You destroyed my business too? I invested in better competition, I corrected. Your business destroyed itself by failing to adapt and improve. I just gave your clients a better option. I opened the front door and stepped onto the porch where I'd stood 14 months ago, humiliated and holding ice cream money. Now I owned the house, the business that had replaced his, and the future that would rise from the ashes of their old life. Goodbye, Charles, Carol, Daniel. I hope you find happiness in your new apartment. I really do. I walked to my car without looking back, even though I could hear Carol's renewed sobbing and Charles calling my name. Tomorrow, the demolition would begin. By Wednesday, every trace of this house would be gone. And in its place, I would build something beautiful. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my Columbus apartment, staring out at the city lights, wondering if I would feel different after seeing the house come down. For 14 months, this moment had been my driving force. The symbolic destruction of everything that had once rejected me. At 6 a.m. Tuesday, I drove to Millfield with a thermos of coffee and a lawn chair from my patio. I wanted to witness every moment of the demolition, to see each wall fall that had once contained my humiliation. The demolition crew was already setting up when I arrived at 7:30. Heavy machinery lined Maple Street. An excavator. A dump truck. Workers in hard hats surveying the structure they would soon erase. I set up my chair across the street, in the exact spot where I'd parked yesterday to watch Charles and Carol say goodbye to their former life. Neighbors had gathered too. Mrs. Henderson, who lived 2 houses down, stood on her front porch with her arms crossed, clearly disapproving of the destruction. The Johnsons from next door watched from their driveway, their expressions mix of curiosity and sadness. Several people I didn't recognize had stopped their morning jogs to witness the spectacle. At 8 a.m. sharp, the excavator roared to life. The first swing of the massive metal arm punched through the front wall where the living room window used to be. The window where I'd watched Charles and Carol move through their house one last time, where I'd seen Daniel slouch carelessly while his parents grieved. The second swing took out part of the front porch. The porch where I'd stood countless summer evenings, where Carol had tended her plants, where I'd learned to tie my shoes and had my first heartbreak over a middle school crush. Each blow of the machine felt like a page being ripped from a book I'd never wanted to read again. By 9 a.m., most of the front wall was gone, exposing the interior like a dollhouse. I could see the kitchen where I'd done homework at the table, where Carol had taught me to bake cookies for school fundraisers, where I'd eaten countless meals while Daniel complained about my presence at family dinners. The living room where they'd given me ice cream money was completely open to the elements now. The excavator's arm swung through the space where Charles had sat in his chair, where Carol had avoided eye contact, where Daniel had laughed at my humiliation. By 10 a.m., a small crowd had gathered. I recognized most of the faces. Longtime Millfield residents who remembered when Charles and Carol had first bought the house, who had watched me grow up in their neighborhood, who had probably never known how little I truly belonged there. Such a shame, I heard Mrs. Patterson say to her neighbor. That was always such a well-maintained house. I wonder what they're going to build here. Some kind of office building, I heard, came the reply. Seems wrong to tear down a family home for commercial space. A family home? The irony wasn't lost on me. At 11 a.m., they brought down the back wall, destroying Carol's kitchen and the small breakfast nook where she'd served us pancakes on Sunday mornings. The wall that had separated the kitchen from the dining room, where we'd had Thanksgiving dinners and birthday celebrations, crumbled into rubble. By noon, only parts of the foundation remained, along with piles of debris that had once been the house where I'd learned to read, where I'd hidden under my bed during thunderstorms, where I'd spent 25 years believing I was part of something I would never truly belong to. The excavator methodically cleared the wreckage, loading dump truck after dump truck with the physical remnants of my childhood. Carol's prized rose garden was crushed under the treads of the machinery. 18 years of careful cultivation reduced to broken stems and displaced soil. At 2 p.m., it was finished. Where the house had stood for 47 years, there was now just a level lot with disturbed earth and a few foundation stones. The mailbox with their house number had been removed, leaving only a metal post marking where a family had once lived. I sat in my chair for another hour, staring at the empty space. I had expected to feel triumph, satisfaction, closure. Instead, I felt hollow. The house was gone, but the anger that had sustained me for so long remained, with nowhere left to focus itself. My phone buzzed with a text from David. Construction crew wants to know when to start site prep for the new building. I looked at the vacant lot, imagining the sleek 4-story building that would rise there, with my company's name prominently displayed. Mitchell Consulting Solutions, a monument to my success built on the grave of their rejection. Next week, I texted back. Let's build something beautiful. But as I folded my chair and walked back to my car, I wondered if beautiful was really what I was building, or if I was just creating a more elegant version of the same emptiness I'd always felt. 18 months later, I stood in the executive conference room on the 4th floor of the Mitchell Consulting Solutions building, looking down at Maple Street through floor-to-ceiling windows. The building was everything I'd envisioned: sleek glass and steel, modern lines, my company's logo visible from 3 blocks away. It was beautiful, successful, and completely mine. But it was also empty in ways I hadn't anticipated. Charles and Carol had moved to a small apartment complex on the outskirts of town. I learned from Mrs. Murphy that Charles had found work at a local hardware store, not running his own agency anymore, but grateful for steady employment with health benefits. Carol's diabetes was under control, and she'd started volunteering at the library again, though only a few hours a week. Daniel had finally been forced to grow up. With no family safety net and facing real consequences for his choices, he'd managed to find work at a warehouse outside Columbus. It wasn't glamorous, but he was supporting himself for the first time in his 23 years. Word was he'd even gotten his own apartment and stopped drinking so heavily. My company was thriving beyond my wildest expectations. We now had 37 employees across 3 offices, and I'd been featured on the cover of Ohio Business Magazine as Young Entrepreneur of the Year. The lottery money had been the catalyst. But everything since then was built on genuine talent and relentless work ethic. Yet standing in my glass tower, looking down at the street where I'd once ridden my bike and learned to drive, I felt more isolated than I ever had in that cramped studio apartment above the bakery. That's when I noticed the woman with the small child walking past my building. She stopped at the corner, pointing up at my logo and explaining something to the little girl. Through the window, I could see her lips moving. That's where Mommy works. Jennifer Walsh, one of my senior consultants. A single mother I'd hired 8 months ago when she was desperate for work after her divorce. She was brilliant with client relations and had quickly become invaluable to our operations. I'd given her flexible hours so she could pick up her daughter from school, something her previous employer had refused to accommodate. I watched them walk away, hand in hand, and realized something I'd been avoiding for months. The empire I'd built wasn't just about success. It was about creating the kind of workplace I'd always wished existed. A place where people were valued for their contributions, where talent mattered more than connections, where single mothers could build careers without sacrificing their children. My employees weren't just staff. They were people who'd been overlooked elsewhere, given opportunities they'd never had before. Like Marcus, the brilliant programmer who'd been passed over for promotions because he didn't fit corporate culture. Like Susan, the accountant who'd been let go at 55 because her company wanted younger energy. Like David, the marketing specialist who'd struggled to find work after a gap in his resume following his military deployment. I had built more than a business. I had built a family of sorts, not bound by blood or adoption papers, but by mutual respect and shared purpose. That evening, I drove to Murphy's Corner store for the first time in months. Mrs. Murphy's face lit up when she saw me. "Tiffany, look at you!" She beamed, gesturing toward my business suit and confident bearing. "I drive past your building every day. So proud of what you've accomplished." "Thank you, Mrs. Murphy. That means a lot coming from you." "You know," she said, leaning across the counter conspiratorially, "Charles comes in here sometimes. Always asks if I've heard how you're doing. I think he regrets how things ended between you all." I considered this information. "How are they doing? Really?" "Better than expected, honestly. Charles seems happier working at the hardware store than he ever did running that insurance agency. Carol's health is stable, and she's made friends at the library. Even Daniel has straightened himself out, got a job, his own place. Sometimes struggles bring out the best in people." On my way out, I bought a lottery ticket. Not out of desperation this time, but as a reminder of how far I'd come. $2 that represented hope instead of rage. 6 months later, I made a decision that surprised everyone, including myself. I established the Mitchell Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping young people aging out of foster care. The foundation provides scholarships, mentorship, and support services. Everything I'd needed at 18 when I'd aged out of the system and moved into that tiny apartment above the bakery. At the foundation's first annual gala, held in the main conference room of my building, I gave a speech about second chances and building something meaningful from rejection. I talked about how the worst thing that ever happened to me, being dismissed with ice cream money, had ultimately led to the best thing, discovering my own worth independent of anyone else's validation. Charles, Carol, and Daniel weren't invited to the gala, but Mrs. Murphy was there, beaming with pride as I spoke about resilience and hope. Jennifer Walsh was there with her daughter, who drew me a picture of our building with, "Thank you for giving Mommy a good job," written in crayon. My employees were there, along with foster children who'd received scholarships, business owners we'd helped succeed, and community leaders who'd watched me transform from a dismissed daughter into a force for positive change. As I concluded my speech, I looked out at the faces in the audience, people who valued me for who I was and what I contributed, not for whose blood ran through my veins. This was my real family, built not through biology or legal documents, but through choices and mutual respect. The building I'd constructed on Maple Street wasn't just a monument to my success over Charles and Carol's rejection. It had become a beacon for other overlooked, underestimated people to find their own worth and build their own dreams. The ice cream money had bought me more than lottery tickets. It had bought me the rage necessary to refuse the limitations others tried to place on me. And from that rage, I'd built something beautiful after all. Not just wealth or success, but purpose. Some stories end with revenge. This one ended with redemption. Mine, and eventually, in their own way, theirs too. The girl who'd been given pocket change and told to buy ice cream had bought herself a future instead. And in doing so, she'd created futures for dozens of others who'd been told they didn't matter. That was worth more than any lottery jackpot could ever be.